Ethan rushed through the airport, his heart pounding. Today was everything, his dream job interview at a Fortune 500 company. But just as he reached his gate, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with her luggage, her frail hands trembling. People walked past, ignoring her. Ethan hesitated. If he helped, he would miss his flight. His future was on the line. But something inside him refused to walk away. He sighed, turned back, and offered his help, unaware that this single act of kindness would change his life forever. Because the woman he was helping was no ordinary passenger. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. Ethan adjusted his tie as he hurried through the bustling airport terminal. Today was the day that could change his life forever. He had spent months preparing for this job interview, an opportunity with a Fortune 500 company that could elevate his career to unimaginable heights. Missing this flight was not an option. He checked his watch, his heart pounding as he weaved through the crowd, his carry-on bag swinging at his side. Gate B12 was just ahead, and he had mere minutes before the doors would close. As he picked up his pace, something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. An elderly woman stood near the check-in counter, struggling with her suitcase. The bag was nearly twice her size, and despite her best efforts, she could not lift it onto the conveyor belt. People rushed past her, too consumed with their own schedules to stop. Her frail hands trembled as she tried again, failing once more. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had no time for distractions. His future depended on this flight, but something about the scene made his feet slow. He had been raised better than this. His mother's voice echoed in his head, reminding him that success meant nothing if he lost his humanity along the way. With a deep breath, he made his decision. He turned toward the woman. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you need some help?" The elderly woman looked up, startled, and then gave him a relieved smile. "Oh dear, you are too kind. I just need to get this bag onto the counter, but it is heavier than I expected." Ethan lifted the suitcase effortlessly and placed it onto the conveyor belt. "There you go," he said with a reassuring smile. "You are all set." The woman placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You are a good young man." "Thank you." Ethan smiled and turned back toward his gate, only to hear his name being called over the loudspeaker. His stomach dropped. Final boarding call for Flight 267 to New York. Gate B12. Panic surged through him as he sprinted forward, dodging travelers and suitcases in his path. His lungs burned, his mind raced. He could not miss this flight. He reached the gate just as the door shut. "No, no, please, that is my flight!" He panted, gripping the counter. The gate agent barely looked up. "I am sorry, sir. The flight is closed." Ethan's heart sank. Everything he had worked for, gone. His dream job interview, his chance at a future he had envisioned. It was slipping away. He leaned against the counter, catching his breath, regret creeping in. Had he just thrown everything away for a few seconds of kindness? The elderly woman approached, her eyes filled with concern. "Oh dear, did you miss your flight because of me?" Ethan forced a smile. "It is okay, ma'am. I will figure something out." She studied him for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek, black business card. "I think you should call this number," she said, handing it to him. Ethan took the card hesitantly and glanced at it. His breath caught. The name on the card was one he had seen before, but only in business magazines and Forbes articles. It belonged to one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Confused, he looked up at the woman. "Wait, this is your company?" She smiled knowingly. "Let us just say, I think you might have missed the wrong meeting today." Ethan's mind spun as he realized that missing his flight might have been the greatest stroke of luck he had ever had. Ethan stared at the business card in his hand, his pulse racing. The name printed on it belonged to Margaret Whitmore, the CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, one of the most influential Fortune 500 companies in the country. He had read about her countless times, watched interviews where she spoke about leadership and perseverance, but standing here, looking at the kind-eyed elderly woman in front of him, he could hardly believe it. You are Margaret Whitmore?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She chuckled. "Surprised?" He nodded, still trying to process what was happening. Just minutes ago, he had thought he had ruined his future. Now he was standing in front of a woman who had the power to change everything with a single decision. Margaret glanced at the closed gate, then back at Ethan. "Where were you heading?" Ethan swallowed hard. "New York. I had a job interview with Lancaster and Bell." Her brow lifted slightly. "Ah, L&B. A fine company. Competitive. I assume it was an executive trainee position?" He nodded. "Yes, I have been preparing for months." She studied him thoughtfully. "And yet, you stopped to help a stranger instead of running to your gate." He hesitated. "It felt like the right thing to do." Margaret's lips curved into a smile. "That says a lot about you, young man." She turned toward the lounge area. "Come, sit with me for a moment." Ethan followed her, still unsure if he was dreaming. As they settled into a quiet corner, she leaned forward. "Tell me about yourself, your background, your goals." He hesitated, then decided to be honest. He told her about growing up in a small town, about his parents working tirelessly to provide for him. He explained how he had worked through college, balancing multiple jobs while studying finance. He shared his dream of working for a top firm, climbing the corporate ladder, and eventually making a name for himself in the business world. Margaret listened intently, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she tapped her fingers against the armrest of her chair. "You remind me of myself when I was young," she said. "Determined, ambitious, and willing to make sacrifices for what truly matters." Ethan felt his heart pound. Was this leading where he thought it was? Margaret reached into her purse again and pulled out a second card, this one with a handwritten number on the back. "I want you to meet someone," she said, handing it to him. "Call this number tomorrow morning. Tell them Margaret Whitmore sent you." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he took the card. Who am I calling?" She smiled knowingly. "My company's hiring director." His breath caught. "You are offering me a job?" Margaret's expression turned serious. "I am offering you an opportunity. Whether you turn it into something greater, that is up to you." Ethan sat back, his mind spinning. Just an hour ago, he had thought his future was over. Now he held in his hands a direct line to one of the most powerful companies in the world. Fate had taken an unexpected turn, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the small card in his hand, as if it might disappear at any moment. The weight of what had just happened pressed against his chest. He had missed his interview, but in return, he had been handed something even bigger, an opportunity that people spent their entire careers chasing. His mind raced with possibilities. What kind of job was she offering? Was this real, or was it all too good to be true? Margaret watched him carefully, amusement flickering in her eyes. "You look like you have 1,000 thoughts running through your head," she said. He let out a shaky breath. "I do. This is, unexpected." "Life is full of unexpected moments," she said. "The question is, are you willing to take a chance on them?" Ethan swallowed hard. He had spent his life playing it safe, following the rules and sticking to the plan. He had mapped out every step of his career, believing that the only way forward was through hard work and careful strategy. But now all of that had changed in an instant. He had stepped off his carefully paved path to help a stranger, and it had led him somewhere he never could have predicted. Margaret checked her watch. "I have a flight to catch, but I want you to think about something before you make any decisions." Ethan looked up, waiting. "I built my company from the ground up," she said. "I have seen all kinds of people come and go. Some brilliant, some ambitious, some who thought they could take shortcuts to success. But the ones who truly make it, they are the ones who understand that real success is not just about what you do, it is about who you are." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent years trying to prove himself, working harder than anyone else, hoping that one day someone would see his potential. And now the most powerful woman he had ever met was telling him that it was not just about his resume or qualifications. It was about him. Margaret stood and adjusted the strap of her purse. "Call that number tomorrow morning, no later than 9. If you are late, consider the offer gone." Ethan's fingers tightened around the card. "I will be on time," she smiled. "Good." With that, she turned and walked toward the gate, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan sat there for a long moment, his heart still racing. He had come to the airport that morning believing his future depended on one job interview. Now his entire life had been thrown into a new direction, and he had no idea what would come next. But for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed the events of the day. Margaret's words echoed in his head, filling him with both excitement and uncertainty. He had always believed that success required meticulous planning, yet here he was, faced with an opportunity that had come out of nowhere. He kept staring at the small business card resting on his nightstand, its presence both thrilling and terrifying. By the time the sun rose, Ethan had made his decision. He showered, dressed in his best shirt, and sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number, glancing at the clock. It was 8:59 a.m. The call connected on the first ring. "Good morning," a sharp professional voice answered. "Margaret Lawson's office." Ethan cleared his throat. "This is Ethan Carter. I was told to call this number." There was a slight pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Hold for one moment." His heart pounded as he waited, hearing faint voices in the background. Then another voice came through, familiar, warm, and commanding. "Ethan," Margaret said, "I was hoping you would call." "I gave you my word," he said. "I like that," she replied. "Punctuality is a good start. Now listen carefully. My driver will pick you up in 30 minutes. I hope you're ready." Ethan's pulse quickened. Ready for what? To prove that yesterday was not just luck. The line went dead before he could ask another question. He exhaled sharply, staring at his phone. He had expected an address, an interview time, something normal. Instead, he was being thrown into the unknown once again. 30 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the door without a word. Ethan hesitated for only a second before sliding in. The ride felt endless. The city blurred past the windows as Ethan tried to anticipate what lay ahead. Finally, they pulled into a towering glass building that screamed power and prestige. As he stepped out, he felt a mix of awe and intimidation. Inside, a woman with an earpiece greeted him. "Mr. Carter, follow me." She led him through marble-floored hallways until they reached a massive door. She pushed it open, revealing an office that overlooked the entire city. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Ethan," she said, "are you the kind of man who waits for opportunities, or the kind who creates them?" He met her gaze, knowing that whatever he said next could change everything. Ethan held Margaret's gaze, his mind racing. Every fiber of his being told him this was more than just an interview. It was a test, one far beyond anything he had prepared for. He straightened his posture, forcing himself to steady his voice. "I believe opportunities come to those who recognize them," he said. "Yesterday, I could have walked away. I could have ignored you and made it to my interview on time, but something told me that moment mattered more than anything I had planned." Margaret studied him carefully, then gestured toward the chair in front of her desk. Ethan sat, his hands clasped tightly together to keep them from trembling. "Do you know how I built my empire, Haina?" she asked. He shook his head. "I was a waitress," she said, barely making ends meet, living off tips, working double shifts just to afford rent. People walked past me every day without a second glance. But one man, a complete stranger, saw me struggling. He gave me advice that changed everything. "You have potential beyond these walls," he told me. "You just need someone to see it." Ethan leaned forward, captivated by her words. "That moment lit a fire in me," she continued. "I educated myself, took risks, and climbed my way to the top. And now, I do not look for people with the perfect resume. I look for people with instinct, resilience, and the courage to step into the unknown." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Is that why I'm here?" Margaret smiled slightly. "You were willing to put aside your own agenda to help someone in need. That tells me more about you than any interview ever could." A knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a suit entered, carrying a folder. He handed it to Margaret without a word and left. She opened it, glancing over the contents before sliding it across the desk. Ethan hesitated before picking it up. His eyes widened as he read the first line. Job offer, Executive Training Program, Lawson Enterprises. I am offering you a chance, Margaret said. A position designed for those who have the potential to become leaders. It will not be easy. You will face challenges, failures, and moments where you will question yourself. But if you push through, you could build something greater than you ever imagined. Ethan felt his pulse hammering in his ears. Why me? Because yesterday, you proved you were already a leader. You just did not realize it yet. His hands tightened around the folder. He thought about the job interview he had missed, the path he had believed was his only chance at success. And yet here he was, being offered something far greater. This is your moment, Margaret said. What are you going to do with it? Ethan took a deep breath, knowing there was only one answer. Ethan stared at the job offer in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Just 24 hours ago, he had been rushing to a completely different opportunity, one he thought was the key to his future. Now, fate had led him here, sitting across from a woman who could change his life forever. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the enormity of the decision making his hands tremble slightly. Margaret watched him with quiet patience, her expression unreadable. She had given him this chance, but she was not going to push him. This was his choice to make. Ethan took a deep breath. I do not know what to say. Margaret leaned back in her chair. That is because no one has ever given you a chance like this before. He exhaled slowly, his mind spinning. You barely know me. How do you trust that I am the right person for this? She smiled. I do not trust resumes, Ethan. I trust people. And you showed me who you are before you ever knew who I was. Ethan thought about the moment he had stopped to help her, how he had not hesitated, how his instincts had driven him to act. He had not known it then, but that one decision had altered his entire future. Margaret folded her hands on the desk. I built my company by taking chances on people with potential. I see something in you, something that reminds me of myself when I was just starting out. Ethan swallowed hard. What happens if I say yes? You will enter my executive training program, she said. You will learn the ins and outs of this business from the ground up. You will be challenged in ways you never expected. And if you prove yourself, there will be no limit to what you can achieve. Ethan's mind raced. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He had spent years trying to prove himself, fighting for a chance to stand out. And now the opportunity was right in front of him. But doubt crept in. What if he was not good enough? What if he failed? Margaret seemed to sense his hesitation. Ethan, I do not expect you to be perfect. I expect you to learn. The question is, do you have the courage to step into something unknown and trust that you will grow? Ethan's grip tightened on the folder. This was his moment, the kind of moment that defined a person's life. He met Margaret's gaze. I am in. A slow smile spread across her face. Good. Welcome to Lawson Enterprises. As Ethan walked out of her office, everything felt different. The air seemed lighter, the world filled with possibilities he had never considered before. He had missed an interview but gained something far greater, a future he never could have planned for. And it had all started with a single act of kindness.